afternoon. This is Blake Hull with Knowledge Infusion, and I would like to thank you for joining us today. Today, Knowledge Infusion experts Heidi Spirgi, President, and Kim Heger, Director of Consulting, will walk you through 8 steps to create HR processes that matter to the business. Quick things before we get started. First, today's program is presented via integrated computer-based audio. If you experience any issues with the technology, please just chat into the screen. I will assist you. The backup number for the event is also posted here on the screen. You want to jot that number down in case you do experience any issues with your audio. One of the questions we get is, can we copy of today's slides? And the answer is, of course. All attendees will receive an email with instructions on how to download both the slides as well as a replay after today's presentation. I encourage you to take a minute after today's presentation to fill out the post-event survey to let us know how we did. And we will be monitoring the Q&A panel throughout today's presentation. We want to make sure that today's discussion is very interactive. At this time, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Heidi Spirgi, Knowledge Infusion President, on the line. Heidi, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Great. And I also have Kim Heger, Director of Consulting, online as well. Hi, Kim.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you guys both so much for joining us. And I have a very good group on the line. And with no further ado, Heidi, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Blake, and thank you, Kim, for joining me in today's session. And I want to thank all of our attendees for joining the call for the next hour and participating, hopefully adding some contribution in the form of questions using the Q&A panel. Definitely want to make sure that we address your particular needs. Just in order to get you comfortable with that Q&A panel, I'd like to ask you all to share with us where you are dialing in from today. I'm actually dialing in from very humid Jacksonville, Florida. Florida being one of my favorite places. I live in California, but love to get back here every chance I can. So let me know part of the world you're dialing in from and what the weather is like there. So for those of you who are new to Knowledge Infusion, I just want to provide a little bit of background on who we are as an organization. We are a global HR consultancy, really focused on helping organizations drive business outcomes by rethinking the way they run their HR function. And that means everything from really rethinking their core HR and talent strategies to how do they develop and design future state business processes and really breaking with the past molds of HR, helping them select their technologies and really moving forward into deploying those strategies in order to drive the targeted outcomes. About 6 years old, headquartered in Minneapolis. I'm very proud to announce that we are, for the third year running, have been named to the Inc. 5000 list. Something we're very, very proud of, which is an indicator of our growth over the last 6 years. And we work with global organizations really of all sizes and in every industry, with common denominator across our customer base really being organizations who want to do things differently and really break with the past and really be more responsive to the business. So take a look at where organizations are coming from. We see I've got overcast in Toronto, sunny and warm in San Francisco. Oh gosh, that's my hometown, so looking forward to getting back there. Rainy in Philadelphia, sunny in the northern Chicago suburbs, but somewhat humid in Los Angeles, so dry. And for Michigan, go blue. That's my alma mater, so we love that. Thank you for dialing in from Ann Arbor, Charlotte, North Carolina, New York City, more New York. Cleveland, and my hometown. Gosh, I feel like I'm amongst family here. Thank you all for joining today. So, Knowledge Infusion Services. So, we work with organizations to really design their strategy, whether that be their talent management strategy, their HR service delivery strategy, or more squarely focus on their technology strategy, and then work with organizations to then deploy those strategies. Not just implement technology, while technology is an important part of it, really execution of strategy as a people, process, and technology integrated solution. So we work with organizations in holistic program management, ensuring that their HR function has the right governance model and decision-making models in place, ensuring that it's changed effectively, et cetera. So really a way to ensuring that those strategies are actually deployed and implemented in technology in order to drive the outcomes they're looking for. We offer a service called KI On Demand. KI On Demand is a subscription-based, membership-based service which enables our customers to work with us on a 24/7 basis, on an annual basis, to support them through matching and marrying up our internal experts, our consultants, with their particular needs and questions in the form of workshops and ongoing inquiries and publications. So at no further ado, I want to jump into our agenda and share with you what we're going to be talking about for the next hour or so. We'll start off with the big picture and taking a look at why business processes need to be rethought with HR today. There's been a lot of baggage associated with HR. Processes have been built for a very different era of HR. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is and what that means to the HR function. And then we'll walk you through 8 steps to ensuring that the HR processes that you design in 2011 truly matter to the business and don't matter to HR. So drilling into why do organizations need to think differently about business processes today? If you look at the HR function, and if you take a survey across our customer base or any organizations today, you really see that the vast majority of HR processes have been designed for a very, very different era of HR. HR function has undergone really radical transformation in the last 5 years due to a whole number of different forces, from technology to the shifting economy to the increased diversity of the workforce to the globalization of the workforce. All of these dynamics have really made HR's mission and agenda radically different. It requires a very, very different skill set, and the success measures for the HR function is radically different today than it was when organizations, say, as an example, implemented their core HR ERP solution 10 or 15 years ago, or even as recently as implemented a talent acquisition solution maybe 5 or 6 years ago. HR in the world looks very different today. The diversity that we see, the expectations of the workforce in terms of technology, in terms of collaboration, in terms of mobility are radically different. And if you start with the assumption that you're going to simply take what you're doing today and somehow make it better, you're going to fail. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of transformation. A lot of our customers really struggle with it because the tendency of HR functions, and I would say business as a whole, has been to really optimize business processes versus transform business processes. We need to reflect before we dive into the how, really reflect on what that means. So you can see here, we have just come through an era, which was a good era of optimizing processes, and optimization means everything from creating leaner processes, creating more automated processes, creating more integrated processes. Really, ultimately, optimization implies seeing the current state and trying to make it better, trying to make it more functionally effective or more efficient. And really what we're talking about in transformation is saying, let's look underneath the waterline. Really, let's dig into what are we really trying to accomplish for the organization as a whole and completely rethink how things are done. I want to give you a few examples of what I would say the difference is between optimization and transformation. An example of which is my world on a daily basis, traveling around the globe, is, I think, a great example of optimization. We've seen airlines over the last few years offer new categories in their economy class to offer extended legroom. Absolutely optimizing and improving the flying experience, but not fundamentally transforming it. And contrast this with Virgin American Airlines, which many of you have flown them. They actually went back to the drawing board and said, let's completely rethink the flying experience, everything from what the seats look like to the lighting, transforming that from just a bland, generic whiting to purple lighting. Let's add mood music. Let's make the check-in experience very pleasurable. Let's make our flight attendants that you would like to get to know and be friends with, and not make them wear formal-looking uniforms, etc. So that's an example of, from a different industry, of real transformation. Another good example is if you look at how people and how human beings have interacted with computers over the years. So absolutely, we've seen a high level of optimization in the form of the keyboard over the last 15 to 20 years, moving from a clunky flat design connected by a cord to a mobile ergonomic wireless design to where that it's a better user experience for the end user. But the fundamental transformation is there were individuals who had the brilliance and the ability to step back and say, let's forget about the keyboard. Let's think completely differently about how a human being might be able to interact and convey information to the computer. It's getting what came before and starting anew. So how does this work? How can you apply some of these principles to help you rethink what HR does in your day-to-day work? It starts with outcomes and boiling it down to three simple things. Start with outcomes. Find what is it we want to accomplish for the business, not HR, but for business. Taking a look at data. Look at where the engagement surveys, the retention data, the productivity data, the quality data. Survey your employees and managers to get feedback. Look at current state in terms of process metrics, in terms of data metrics, in terms of service support metrics. Then, once you have defined your outcome and understand your current world from a data perspective, it's big. Just big. I emphasize big think. It's probably the number one, I would say, limitation that most organizations bump into as they embark on any type of business process project. They put blinders on and they forget to reinvent what's possible. Stop there and open up a polling question. And the question that I would like to ask all of you is, what is the greatest challenge your organization faces with transforming processes? Any comments on what you think we expect to see here as well?
Yeah, I guess, just with some of the recent work that I've done over the last 6 to 12 months, I think where I've seen some of the greatest challenges is that involvement and commitment from a senior leadership team to really drive transformational thinking around some of the HR processes. So I have to say A has been one of the things I've seen most recently. How about you?
Well, I agree with you. I actually also think that business outcomes not being clearly defined should be pretty high as well if we start to see the results coming in. Certainly see organizations all the time jump to solution before they really define what it is that they're looking to accomplish. It looks like the results have come in, and it looks like we have the majority of respondents, as you predicted. Actually, no, the majority of respondents have lack of alignment between process outcomes and business strategy. Very interesting result there. Followed closely by resistance to change and business outcomes, and actually the last one being lack of leadership involvement. So that's really good news to hear.
That's awesome.
Yep. So Kim, start walking us through the steps to transforming your processes.
Thanks, Heidi. I appreciate that. So Heidi and I have put together, 8 things that we think are real critical as it relates to transforming the processes with HR. And the first one, Heidi, you can put to the next slide there. We'll just talk a little bit about why KI believes this is really important and key to the success of transforming your processes. So why do we think that? And these are really kind of insights from KI, but many of the processes within HR are antiquated. Heidi had mentioned earlier, they were designed for a different era of HR. So rather than just optimize or automate what we've been doing for the past several years, it really does require that big think, as Heidi mentioned, and removing the antiquation out of the process and really thinking differently. And it isn't about just automating what we've always done. So process transformation is truly rethinking and designing processes that are not for HR's sake, not for, I'll I'll preface this with compliance is still very important. There are other important reasons to transform processes or to redesign. And as many of you mentioned or defined in your poll, that the lack of alignment is one of the biggest challenges. And we do see that often, that processes are not aligned with what the business is trying to accomplish. So that definitely is one of the primary reasons for going through the transformation effort. How do you do this? I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides, but you do have to have some understanding of your current state. You know, what's working, what's not working, how does the business respond to some of these processes, whether they be HR or talent management, what are the pain points that they're experiencing? So, you know, you really need to delve into some of that detail in order to understand where you want to go in the future. And then what are the benefits, right? I mean, there are several benefits that I think the organization will achieve by going through this level of transformation. And one is, if you truly are aligning your processes back to the business goal objectives, there should be a higher level of performance achieved by the business. It's really helping them to achieve their business goals and objectives. And lastly here is the increased level of adoption and satisfaction. So the process that we're going to take you through today, it really does involve many stakeholders outside of HR. So the more folks that you can get involved that are, you know, leading the business, that are interested to, you know, the success of the organization, and it's not just HR sitting at the table, I think the more successful will be. So we'll talk more about that as we move along. So talk about that first. Yeah, go ahead, Heidi.
I just want to provide an example. Just given the fact that the majority of our attendees set of alignment between business strategy and processes was their biggest challenge, and how that plays out in most HR functions. And I'm just going to use an example is where, and this is exactly the importance of transformation versus optimization. Is that processes get handed down from, I'm going to call generation to generation, meaning you know, group of incumbents within HR department to the next group of incumbents within an HR department without any logical or rational connections to justifying those processes and really explaining why or how they connect with the business. So an example of that is we're working, Kim actually worked on a project together with a large global media company, and they're faced with the challenge of, number one, their primary global growth target, or the primary growth opportunity is global expansion, and number two, they're looking to transform their business from a traditional print and publishing media organization to online digital media organization, and they're faced with how do they accomplish both of those goals. And if you look at their recruiting, their performance, and even their talent review process, there's really nothing in any of those processes or learning and development, which really, from a business perspective in the eyes of a line manager, really enabled them to develop, grow, and hire talent, new digital talent on a global basis. Complete disconnect. So that's kind of saying that HR needs to really step back and say, how do we retransform our processes to really meet those business outcomes?
Thanks, Heidi. So one of the first steps in that is really to define the philosophy, the purpose, and the business of the process that you're working to transform. So how do you go to the next slide? Some of the key questions that you, a HR professional, want to be answering as part of this exercise. Again, if this has already been defined within your organization, that's great. You have foundational information to work upon. If this has not been defined, this is one of the first things that you're going to have to uncover, but it does require you to go to the business. It requires you to ask the questions around, you know, what are their fundamental beliefs around the particular process. And a good example would be, we're currently working with a large transportation services company, and the senior leaders of this organization are truly trying to transform how they manage performance, and that they want to be a performance-driven organization where people are focused on the right things, and also focused on the behaviors and how they do, you know, how they accomplish their work. So they really are thinking differently, and not just about doing an annual appraisal. It's about reconnecting back to the business. So the business leaders of this organization have truly defined, and they said, this is our philosophy. They defined the purpose, right? So how do the specific activities that are associated with that process really align to the purpose? Are the steps in the process really truly adding value? And can you quantify what that value is? So another example of that is, and this gets down into the detail of a particular process, but it really requires, what's the value of having 3 levels of approval in a process, whether that be acquisition, performance, what have you? Is that really adding value, or is it just, because we need a check and a balance? So it's those kinds of decisions that have to be thought through, and when you define that purpose, making sure that the steps in the process really support that purpose. And then, of course, you're defining these business outcomes and re-articulating what is the benefit, what is the business going to gain, what benefits are they going to gain by adapting to this new process, or moving with a new way of thinking. First and foremost, to define these, because it really does help guide the decisions that are going to be made regarding the process that you're hoping to transform. And secondly, before we move on to that, I guess, Heidi, what are your thoughts? I think you've worked with a couple of organizations where this has been, the questions and this level of effort has been quite impactful.
And I would say, in my opinion, this is the number one thing that's absent from most business process, and I'm going to use the word design, initiatives within HR and actually even outside of HR, is that they jump over and they miss this step where they're really defining what are we trying to accomplish and why when they jump to the how. It's a tendency that I think I would say probably 95% of organizations suffer from, and part of the reason for that is it does require a very high level of engagement by senior leadership, which we'll talk a little bit about as well in terms of some techniques in terms of getting your business leaders engaged. But with this, to me, it's game over. It's not worth investing in technology. It's not worth any type of product optimization initiative, because you can't define what you're trying to accomplish. You're really never going to get there, and you're going to misapply your efforts and dollars.
Hey, Heidi, we had a great. Oh, go ahead. There's a question. Yeah, the question that's come in that I think is real pertinent, and it's basically, what role do we IT plays in helping HR align business processes and business strategy, especially because we do not want the technology to be driving the process or the strategy? I think that's a good question. How do you want to take that?
I think it's a fantastic question, and it's kind of an interesting era and time right now for IT professionals, because many of them are actually in the position of putting a rock uphill with some of their HR counterparts. And with this, I would say the same is true whether they're in IT or in some type of HR IT or HR process and technology group reporting into the HR function. I think some really smart and savvy IT professionals know that you really need to step back and rethink before you automate. And we're seeing a lot of those individuals be catalysts. I think that when done well, they can be process experts and help guide and facilitate some of this new thinking. But ultimately, at this phase, when you're really talking about what are our outcomes and who do we want to be and do we even want to, look global or not, or why do we care about performance management and what does that mean? It has to come from HR. The catalyst can be IT, and IT can play a really strong role in being a facilitator.
Okay, great. Thanks. The second thing that we talk about and that we work with organizations on is developing these guiding principles. What we do is guiding principles and defining what the success is going to look like. So when we talk about guiding principles, these here are a set of guiding principles that we helped establish at one of the organizations that we work with. These overarching talent management guiding principles, but you'll see their statements that really reflect what they're focused on and what their beliefs and kind of what the value is, what's the vision, what's the mission. This kind of establishes some statements around, and I'll just call out one in particular, is we'll build a consistent global talent management environment with common values, policies, and processes. So that is a pretty powerful statement in that it is a global organization. They want consistency across the globe. Now, consistency doesn't mean that it has to be exactly the same for every division or geographic area, but overarching commonality around process is important to this business. And so this helps to guide some of the decisions that are going to have to be made. So understanding your philosophy, the purpose, and then establishing a set of guiding principles that define we call them kind of the guardrails, right? So the teams of folks that come together to redefine these processes, they have some things to step back and say, does that really align with the values that this organization holds true for what we're trying to accomplish?
And trust me, these are extremely valuable and actually help drive a much more efficient process as you pull together your various stakeholders and build your 2B processes. Without these, it's really hard because you have nothing to fall back on to help guide the decision making. So it's a technique that we use with all of our customers to ensure that those guiding principles are established, whether it be at the talent management level or whether it be at a more discrete level, such as onboarding or compensation, et cetera, to see what's going to guide our design of our 2B process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just give you another example of that. As you mentioned, they could be at the higher talent management level. And then as you get into a process definition, a specific guiding principle around performance management might be that, it's an ongoing process that requires mutual accountability from both the employee, the manager, and the organization. So what that tells us about the process and what we need to make sure that it can do for the business is that it does need to be not an annual event. It's an ongoing process. It incorporates coaching, which requires conversation. So that process definition and those guidelines really help to articulate how that design needs to flow in as you move forward. The second one here is really, visualizing the success, right? So, of course, you have to imagine it finished and define what you believe success is going to mean for your business. I like to think of this in three different buckets, and that these success measures and how we, when we back at the entire effort to transform processes, how are we going to know we were successful, right? So what's the end product? What's the end game we're looking for? And we think of it in three different ways. So what are the end states for the business and how you measure success at the business level? And at individual level, that could be both at the employee or manager level, and then also within HR. So there should be some defined success measures in each of those three categories as you begin to begin the process of transformation.
Okay, I'm just going to provide some quick examples on those three types of measures. So, as Kim said, from a business outcomes or success measures perspective, things such as for a very common measure in the retail world is revenue or wallet share. Things such as opening up new markets if you're looking for if you're working on global expansion, time to market for a new product, time to productivity. Any type of productivity measure, if you have a call center environment, a hospitality environment, any type of services organization, a retail organization, really looking at your operational measures and anything that which might measure productivity. And then lastly, quality. Now, there's the age-old question, how can you prove definitively it was based upon some type of process transformation effort versus something else? That's an age-old and I think relatively tired question. I think it's something which, in order, our professional day, are defining those and then building their programs and processes around those targets and measuring them in a very engaged way with the business. HR outcomes, obviously, there's the traditional efficiency measures which you might want to establish, such as time to fill or cost per hour, et cetera. But also much more strategic measures that organizations are looking at today, things such as productivity, strength, mobility, retention, engagement, are all things which can be measured with hard numbers. actually really give you that guidepost to let you know how you're doing and whether or not you're making an impact.
Excellent. So once you, and again, not that all of these things will happen in this sequential order, because as I mentioned before, if the philosophy, purpose, outcomes, guiding principles, if those have not been defined, you may then start with this, conduct the current state assessment. And this is really that effort to reach out to the business and start asking some questions. And when we do this may help to facilitate the questions around the philosophy and whatnot. But in the event that those things are already defined, you do want to reach out to a diversified group of stakeholders, so people that have a vested interest in what we're trying to accomplish, and really understand from them, what are the strengths? What are the strengths of what we're doing today? Because in process transformation, we are looking at, kind of our current environment. We certainly want to, perhaps remove a lot of the baggage from the process, but there may be some things that are working quite well. We don't want to lose sight of that. We may want to carry that over into our future state. But opportunities, certainly where can we improve? Where are the inefficiencies? Where are the pain points? So it's really, and again, you can do this in a variety of ways. In the organizations that we work with, we've done it through focus groups, small groups of people, 5 to 6, that come around a table and we start having some good discussion around the actual process. One-on-one interviews. This typically works best at the executive level. So really, asking some very pointed questions about the outcomes, the goals, how it aligns to the business, talking about business much more so than the HR process itself. We do this through survey work as well. So we try to use a combination of those methods to gather the insight on what's happening today. And then ask, what do they envision? What's their vision for the future? Because that should help guide us in creating the new design. And staying focused on the right level of detail. Some organizations that we work with, they say, we've got to have it, documented all the way from, the level 1 to level 4 process level on the current state before we can redesign the future. And we take a little bit different approach. We certainly want to understand, document to a certain level, but we don't go down to that real detailed level of current state analysis. We do a root cause analysis, understanding where do some of the causes of the pain points, and what can we do to mitigate those in the future. And the other big thing around understanding your current state is really assessing the organization's readiness to change. The change management and getting people to do things differently or behave differently requires a great deal of effort from a change management standpoint. It's just because we decide to change processes doesn't mean everybody's going to love that, right? So assessing the readiness for change, identifying where your resistance is going to come from, and developing plans very well in advance as to how you're going to mitigate some of the risk and bring those folks along. We can go to the next one. So key thing to bring into your process of redesigning HR processes is really to think about the leading practices. What's going on outside of the 4 walls of your organization? We can learn a ton from other organizations, from other professionals who are going through the same efforts, reaching out to consulting organizations who do benchmarking, who have a understanding of the practices that are being managed in other parts of the world within different types of organizations. So sharing a lot of these leading practices with the stakeholders in which you're engaged with is really helpful in gaining buy-in. So not only understanding, what the current is, but then sharing with them, well, here's maybe what it could be. Here's other organizations are doing. Not that all best practices are right for every organization. I think that's something to really keep in mind, that it must still align with your own strategy. So when you want to utilize leading practices to kind of, in your thinking, just not every best practice or leading practice that you've been exposed to is going to work within your organization. So taking those leading practices, educating stakeholders, and then determining how you can apply those leading practices within your environment. And we're working with an organization right now on this exact activity where we're bringing in 60 business leaders throughout the different various business segments, and everybody from a senior executive down to an individual contributor, including our professionals. And they're really taking, and that's the approach that we're taking is, should we understand our current state to be, here's what we know are opportunities, right? Here's what other organizations are thinking about and are starting to implement, and taking those and saying, all right, how does that apply to our organization? Then making recommendations to change what their current implement is. It's definitely something that can be very cool.
Kim, I actually say that when we're engaged with our customers in a business process transformation project, that probably the most pivotal moment of an engagement is the educational session where we're sharing what's possible and what other organizations are doing today. And the reminders that are taken off and the number of comments, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know, is really, I think, just a pivotal moment for an organization to really, move towards that big think process. It's really difficult if you've been, in HR all of your life or in this working for the same organization. It's really hard to really even dream something different. So I just want to emphasize that, while there's no such thing as true best practice, there is a just tremendous amount of creativity and innovation that can be traded by what other organizations are doing.
Absolutely. And after you've done that analysis and kind of understanding of your current state, and you've educated both, your external stakeholders outside of HR as well as HR to some extent, then it's time to really start thinking about the future state, right? What is it that we could do within our business that's different? A couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, as we've been talking about all along, is where that future state ends up to be. It has to be aligned to the strategy. So again, if you're a growth company and you're expanding in global markets, then your talent processes must align to that. There are roadblocks that HR puts away that need to be removed. How are you going to do that? So really ensuring that you are creating the intelligence that the business needs in order to make better decisions about their people. So again, if that's in your core types of processes or in talent processes, what's the intelligence that your process is going to create that will help the business make better decisions and more quickly? Have visibility, transparency, all of those sorts of things is going to require your process to be managed differently. Is when you're creating that future state, it's really about the workforce experience. It's about what is the end user going to gain, what's in it for me. It's finding that and understanding it and then designing to it. So the employee, the manager, the executive, the HR professional who has to embrace this new process, design it with them in mind, and understand that what's going to drive their level of excitement and motivation around the process. Integration. When you're thinking about your future state, you have to be thinking whatever the process is. So again, if we're using performance management as an example, what are the other integration points that need to be established within that process? So competencies is a good example, right? That if we're going to be assessing the how of people's performance, we need to understand how competencies will integrate. Same thing with recruitment. If we're assessing an external candidate's capability based on a set of competencies, are we evaluating that person's performance now that they've been hired against the same set of competencies, and how do those processes integrate? So really thorough out, if you've got a group of people in performance management, you have to bring in people from talent acquisition or people from succession and start having those joint conversations. And what are those collaborative touch points, right? So what other types of technologies and methods can we use to engage people? We've got some organizations that are definitely tapping into the technologies and integrating that into their everyday work experience. It's helping to drive some of this collaboration within the talent processes.
Great. I encourage everyone to use their Q&A panel once again to type in questions that you have for Kim or myself. While you're doing that, I want to just share a quick customer story and an example of where I think an organization did a really good job at taking the desired outcome and really designing a future state process. We're working with a large global retailer with multiple brands. Their parent company, and they decided that they had to move. They really needed to share talent more effectively, functional talent across their brands and across their geographies on a global basis. Now, the problem was each of those brands had an autonomous reporting structure. So marketing and sales and IT reported directly into each of the brands. Yet they knew that they were losing good people because they didn't necessarily have the opportunities for career advancement. So what they did is they moved from a fairly static annual succession or annual succession planning process to what they called a monthly planning process, which they really managed functional talent pipelines, looking at both critical roles as well as key talent in those pipelines across them. And they had functional leaders. We worked with them to determine who the functional leader of each of those talent pipelines needed to be. And then on a monthly basis, really looking at, very planful and looking at demand, looking at supply, looking at plan moves to ensure that you're not losing key talent, and looking at critical roles so that you always have planned successors for any of those critical roles within those talent pipelines. So a very different way of addressing, I would say, an age-old HR problem, which is right person, right place, right time, but really thinking differently about how you meet that outcome.
Yeah, another good question that came in around that kind of relates to that to some extent around, in the experiences that you've had, have you seen some best practices or leading practices of how to do this at a global level, geographically, when there's multiple processes globally?
That's a great question. I think probably the most important thing when I work with customers on global process design is really ensuring that you start at the outset building a global process. I think the tendency that we see as organizations will say, well, we're going to roll out first in North America, maybe U.S. and Canada, and we'll design for them, for those two countries, and which make the assumption that, it'll work, roughly 80% of it will work for the rest of the world, and then we'll keep it moving forward. And that's a big mistake for many reasons. First of all, it's often a false assumption that what will work in North America will work in other regions. So you're much better off with saying, let's collectively pull all of our collective needs in current states together to design that single global standard, and define one time and only one time here's what's going to be standard and here's what's going to be non-standard. So here you can operate outside of guardrails and address your local needs, but here's where we're going to be 100% consistent globally. And it only works if you start globally out the gate. The other problem, so not only is it not as effective, but it's not as efficient because we see a lot of rework down the road. So just from a pure cost and resource perspective, we find that organizations end up with a lot of churn and waste if they start global. And lastly, I would say change management is a huge issue. So ensuring that you get all of the right stakeholders to the table, all of your regions and all of your business units, so that it doesn't feel like it's happening to them, but that they're part of it, and that they'll become then change champions and driving that change in their region or their theater.
Definitely, yeah, and in establishing those guiding principles, I think is one of those key things too at global level. So very important. This is just an example of a process design. I think some important point here is that once you go through this effort of redefining and creating your philosophies and definitions, definitions is an important one, and then you document that in a nice kind of process flow documentation, understanding what each of the roles are that will be interacting within that process. What are the specific steps? This becomes your blueprint. You then work with your technology provider if technology is going to be implemented to support this, and it really walks them through, here's the flow, here's the steps in the process, here are the things that we need to ensure that the technology can enable. Just kind of provide you with an example. But I have another.
One of the things I just wanted to add real quickly is, speaking of working with your technology provider, it's really important to, as you prepare to work with them and translate your process into their technology, it's really important to not only define the workflow, but also to define, critical and fundamental decisions, such as things around privacy, who's going to see what within the application, levels of approval, et cetera. So there's a lot of additional questions outside of pure workflow, which ideally are answered before the technology provider comes in, because they're going to be looking for answers and start configuration on day one.
Yeah, so thanks, Heidi. And before we move on to the next, I guess we're real curious to see, what talent processes are in need of transformation within your own organizations. So take a minute and answer that question, that poll question. That would be great. What comes to mind for you in terms of the process that is in most need of transformation?
So I'm going to be a cynic and bet all of the above. I don't think there's a whole lot of transformative thinking when it comes to process. I think we're starting to see some, which is great. But I think we've actually just coming out of this era of optimization, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen in the next years as we start to see more radical thinking. What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, I would say, again, just based on some of my exposure within organizations of recent, because of some of the economic concerns and things, I think succession and performance have actually been at the top of the list. I mean, people are looking to really transform how they think about their internal talent and what they can do differently through, through succession and talent, understanding high performers and how to retain them. So I'll be curious to see what else thinks. Yeah, Heidi, I think that the highest one is all of the above. So you're right; they're all in need of transformation. With a close one behind is performance management. So I think our thoughts were similar.
Yeah, second and third was performance and succession. So I guess we're doing something right.
So
great. What I want to talk briefly about is this concept of calibration and configuration. We find far too often in working with organizations is, we'll work with them, help them define their future state, their business outcomes, their success measures, really transform a to-be process. And then when it comes to working with technology vendors, they really just run into a wall. And they run into a wall for a few reasons. One is I think organizations today have too high an expectation around the process expertise that they're going to get from the consultants from their technology vendor. Technology vendors, what you're going to get from their consulting team is first and foremost product experts. They're better than anyone else how product works and what's possible in the product, but what they're going to necessarily offer is really process or best practice or strategic functional expertise. So we work with organizations on a regular basis who wind up getting very frustrated because they're not able to actually be guided when it comes to making configuration decisions, or what we call calibration, which means calibrating your process to the technology effectively. Too little preparation and too few answers. As I mentioned, first thing that a vendor is going to do is they're going to start peppering you with questions on how you want the application configured. And those configuration questions are really very often big strategic questions that can really sometimes entail some pretty radical change. So ensuring that you determine what those key questions they're going to ask and ensure that you have the answers before you're sitting in the room with the vendor. Otherwise, you may be forced into providing information or no information, either faulty information or no information. Productivity and process eclipsing outcomes. It's really key that even though business process transformation is critical to do before you look to deploy a process into a technology, that you don't be rigid about it. Remain focused on the outcomes, and each technology, depending on the technology you select, how the process works should look different, and you should be open and flexible to modifying your process. Think of those processes as draft until you get it actually into technology. So how does this work? It's really an iterative balancing act between your transformed business process and the delivered software solution. It requires a really strong dialogue with your vendor, really articulating your outcome and not just jumping to feature, function, and condition, but really let them know what you're driving towards, what your expectations are at the end of the day for your process, and help them figure out to get collectively how that solution can best get you to that outcome. The next thing I think that is really critical is, how do you ensure that your business process, after working with the vendor, actually has been correctly translated into technology. So what we've seen historically is a tremendous amount of focus on application testing, which means that does the application work, does the data flow, as well as usability testing, which basically, in a nutshell, looks at where an end user can actually find their way through a system and through a process, but very little focus on does the process flow as designed? Does it accomplish what we set out to accomplish? And does the end user actually have a rich and integrated experience, or is it very siloed? So even looking at things like integration with things like Portal and business intelligence, testing data and process integration between core HR and a talent management application, or between multiple talent management applications to ensure that the data flowed in from talent acquisition into your core HR system is actually then populated into your talent review process so that you can actually understand where the employee worked prior to your the current employer, what their education is, et cetera. And Heidi Kim talked about. Yep.
Yeah, Heidi, there's a question that came in that I'd like to propose. What do you recommend for transformation? Baby steps, small changes, or go big and do as much at once as possible?
That's such a great question, and I wish it were a simple answer. And I think it really depends on two things. I think, one, it depends on your culture, which is it a culture that can and has a history of being able to absorb significant change. And part of that is also assessing what level of senior business leadership support you have. If the right client's in place, definitely go big. Some of the things that would make you go small are if you've rolled out a lot of change already. If you're an organization which has a history of sort of a track record around process change or technology change, you're going to need to be sensitive to that history and ensure that the organization doesn't feel like the wheels are coming off.
Yeah, follow-up to that is, do we need to optimize before we transform?
Very interesting question. So I actually say no. I would say that's actually I think you're getting it backwards. I think that a lot of optimization efforts are misguided. They drive more efficiency typically into the process, perhaps a better user experience, but they don't get you necessarily any closer to what the business is looking for. So I guide our customers to put your scarce resources where it really have the most impact. That's in transformation, and you can still take transformative baby steps. It doesn't have to be radical, but you're transforming it in order to drive a new and different outcome or closer to what the business is looking for versus just improving current state.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Heidi, on that one. I think it's better to just move to transformation and not go through that step of optimization.
Thanks, Kim. So one other key concept is really this notion of launching business capability. Don't think about rolling out a new process or rolling out a new technology to the workforce. You have to launch business capability. You have to be able to articulate what's in it for me, what the business is going to be able to do tomorrow that it can't do today. If you can't do that, if you can't honestly, with integrity, find the language and the messaging and market what's in it for me and what's in it for the business, it's probably an ill thought out initiative. So really make sure that you don't focus on process and technology so it feels like another hoop to jump through. We use three kind of core tenets as we help our customers think about launching business capability. The first, it has to be sticky. It has to have return value, or employees need to want to go back for a reason. It has to be measurable. And outputs have to somehow drive something that can be measured and demonstrate value to the employee, the manager, the business, or HR. And then it has to be in the past. And in the past really means try to do what you can to integrate the process into the way people work, whether that be you have a mobile workforce and say, we're not going to wait for mobility or mobile applications for phase 2. We have to get it right the first time because this is how people work. Or let's say you have a heavily manufacturing-based workforce. How do you put your process and your new capability in the path of your workforce and not make it be an afterthought and something they have to go searching for? The key concept in really transforming your processes, it doesn't end when you go live. Very often when organizations transform processes and they deploy their processes into a new technology, they fall prey to this go-live mentality. And you have to adopt an outcome-based mentality and really continue to measure, adapt, and reinforce whether or not you've achieved outcomes you set out to achieve with your new process. So some key concepts around measuring is go back to those processes, look at business data, bring in operational data, sales data, quality data, productivity data. Really take a look at whether or not you are moving the needle on an ongoing basis, as well as listening to employees and managers, and then adapt. We make our technology as never-ending data. In the era of software as a service, and the good news is that never-end data is the development model of software vendors today, and it should be the development model of HR organizations. That is not a one and done, we've built it and they will come. It's an evolutionary function where you're always looking to improve your processes, get closer to the outcomes that you set out to achieve, and re-communicate to the workforce on a continual basis. Once a year communication, it's now time to complete your employee review form, or we're rolling out a new talent profile and we'd like you to enter data about yourself, will be successful. It has to be controlled, and you have to adapt. You'll see what works. It never works completely at the outset, out the gate. There's always lessons learned, ways in which you need to go back and communicate and tweak either the process or the ways that you've communicated your process. So what I want to leave you with is, as you think about continual beta, what you really want to be thinking about is moving from automation to intelligence. So how do you build into the DNA of the way you think about processes? Ultimately, everything that you do, every process should be one step in a broader intelligence effort. So everything is about building more insight and more control and learnings about your workforce and the connections of that workforce to the business. So if that remains at the core, as you look to evolve and iterate your processes over time. I did want to share with you a little bit about how Knowledge Infusion can assist. We adopt this outcome data and big think approach, working with our organizations from defining what is it they want to do, what is it that they want to deliver to the business, assessing current state and understanding all of the data points that will provide you insight into current state. And lastly, really thinking big about the future, learnings from other organizations, other industries, other functions outside HR to really think about what's possible and what might work in our organization, and then ultimately designing that future state. And not only transforming your business processes, as you can see here, but we also work with organizations to help build that into their technology, being that partner to help them calibrate it, test it, and ensure they're launching and measuring and adapting over time. So we are at the top of the hour, so I would like to turn it back over to Blake.
Great, Heidi and Kim, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Because at the top of the hour there were a few questions that were not addressed, and we will address them immediately following today's discussion. Again, the material covered in today's presentation, including instructions on how to download both the slides and the replay, will be emailed to you. And as always, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Heidi or Kim directly. Thanks again for joining us. Everybody have a great day.